a number of different research stations. Got it, okay. All right, so the basics. The most common way that folks submit projects to NSF, to the Arctic Sciences section, is what we call a standard research proposal. And that's submitted most frequently by faculty members at universities, and it can be for up to 5 years. 5 years is our max. We also have opportunities for dissertation research. We have we're in the second year of the post-doctoral fellowship program, which provides 2 years of support. We also have the pretty prestigious early career development program. It's called the Career Program at NSF, and it is pre-tenure. It's for folks who have recently taken either a tenure track or a more or less permanent position and are looking for a large 5-year project to really kick off their careers. Finally, we have the mid-career advancement, which is a post-tenure opportunity. And I would like to see a lot more of these. We don't see enough of these in the Arctic section. These are for folks who have tenure, who are looking for either a change of direction in their work, or they want to initiate a new research project, mid-career advancement. This is not all, though. We've got all kinds of other opportunities, and these include rapid response research. So in Alaska, we've had several projects that deal with, say, archaeological sites rapidly eroding into Bering Sea or into the Beaufort. We have conference and workshop opportunities. If you're interested in that, let me know. That's an underused proposal type. I'd like to see more of those. We have research coordination networks. So if you have a thematic topic that you'd like to network with either researchers in the lower 48 or researchers in Europe, you can propose a research coordination network, and that can include conference activities. It can include educational activities, lots of potential there. We also have a relatively new type of planning grant. And although these types of grants have always been available, they have been underutilized at NSF. And so now we're really encouraging folks to look into planning grants, which are intended to help folks establish collaborations with either other scientists or other researchers, or with communities. So, for example, if you're a cultural anthropologist and you want to start working with a group of communities in Alaska, you probably need to get out there. You need to talk to people. You need to introduce yourself. You need to maybe run a focus group and see what their interests are, whether or not your research topics align with their needs. A planning grant can get you out there, can underwrite the cost of a focus group, and it can basically help you assess whether or not your research is relevant to that community. And then you come back to NSF with a full-scale research project that has an established community collaboration. That's not the only use of a planning grant, but that's one of them. And finally, we have exploratory research. This is what we call high-risk, high-reward research, where there's a relatively high possibility that you won't find anything, or your hypothesis will be completely disproven, and therefore, you're not going to find what you hope you're going to find. It can be broader than that, but those are, we don't see those very often, but they're there for a reason, which is that there are some types of research that for example, there might be an area that hasn't been surveyed archaeologically, and you might hypothesize that there's a heavy occupation there, but you have no idea until you get out there. You might get out there and find there's nothing. That might be appropriate for exploratory research award. Rapid response research, planning grants, and exploratory research all have funding caps of either $200,000 or $300,000. Unlike the standard research grants, which do not have funding caps and are up to 5 years. So what I would recommend is, if you're not sure which of these types of opportunities would be appropriate, is to get in touch with me. And if you're not sure it's a social science or maybe it's a natural science, then get in touch with me and I'll link you up with whoever would be the most appropriate program officer for whatever it is you're proposing. Okay, what are the priorities? These are general priorities, and certainly proposals don't have to fit into every category here, but you do want to hit some of these main points. So first of all, we fund both very strictly disciplinary research as well as inter and multidisciplinary research. There is sometimes a misconception that, oh, all the research has to be convergent or all has to be multidisciplinary. No, it does not. However, you do want to make sure that if you're proposing a multidisciplinary project and it's a big one that has, say, a $5 million budget, that you go to the right program, and that may or may not be mine. Similarly, if you're really looking strictly along disciplinary lines, you don't want to apply to a program that is after convergent research. Again, one of the ways to really assess this is to read the solicitation, we'll get to that in just a second, and talk to the program officers. In Work in Alaska, we are looking for authentic engagement with local communities. Not all research being conducted in Alaska is appropriate for co-production, but if it is, we want to see it, and reviewers are looking for that. If you are working in a community, or you need a community as the basis from which to conduct your work, then we want to know that that community knows about your work and is interested in having you there. And so we really do advise that you have some clear indicator in your proposal of the degree of relationship that you have with a community that you want to work with. We do not, I think it's safe to say that we don't fund community-based work that doesn't have buy-in from the community, at least in the Arctic section. I can't speak for SBE, but for the Arctic section, we're not sending folks out and giving them funding unless they're welcome, basically, and we want to know that they're welcome. We're very interested in broadening participation in archaeological science and anthropological science more generally. So anywhere that you can integrate students at any level, it could be high school students, it could be undergrads, it could be K through 12. We really like to see that. It's not a requirement, but it's one way of broadening participation that tends to get you extra points. We really like to see that, and reviewers like to see it too. We definitely need to see return of research results to local communities. If you are conducting cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, or archaeology in a community, we need to see that you're taking the results of your research back to that community at the end of your project. And we want to pay for you to do that. We want to know that you're not doing extractive colonialist research where you go in, you take information out, and you don't return it in any form. There are lots of different ways to do this. We don't want to tell you how to do it, but we think it is important that you do. And we encourage you to talk with the communities about how they would like to see research return to them. Finally, ethically open data sharing access and reusability. We want to see open access data to the extent possible. We are not going to make anybody put out data that is sensitive, confidential, or violates IRB rules and regulations. However, to the extent possible, we want data openly available to other researchers. This kind of research is paid for by taxpayer money, and we want to see it used as broadly as possible. Of course, as I say, it needs to be balanced by respect for data sovereignty. We're never going to require you, though, to make sensitive data, sensitive transcripts, or indigenous ecological knowledge, for example, that folks may be willing to share with you, but they don't want to see it go any further. We're not going to make you share that kind of data. However, most data with some caveats can be ethically and openly shared. And that's what we want you to do when possible. Okay, what we got next here? All right, these are the 2 NSF merit review criteria. All applications, all proposals to NSF have to appeal to these 2 criteria. There can be additional criteria, but these are the 2 big ones. Intellectual merit, how does your work advance science? And broader impacts, how does your work benefit others? If you're writing an NSF proposal, you should put these on Post-it notes and look up every 5 minutes to remind yourself that everything that you say in your proposal should somehow relate to these criteria. These are the gold standard for us is intellectual merit and broader impacts. Now, how much of your proposal is intellectual merit versus how much of it appeals to broader impacts, it varies. It's very rare that we see oh, well, the 50% of the value of this proposal is the intellectual merit, the other 50% is broader impacts. Sometimes the bulk of a proposal might be intellectual merit and it has some broader impacts, but they're not a huge part of it. On the other hand, we may have a proposal where the bulk of the value of the project is in its broader impacts. It just depends. So there's no magic equation for how to figure this out, but both need to be addressed in all proposals that we see. Okay, how to start out with NSF. Look at solicitations, and we're going to talk about that. That's coming up next, and dear colleague letters. Meet with program officers, email us. And I really want this, I want to highlight this, and this is one of the reasons I'm doing this, is to put a face to the name. We are a resource for you. We want to know what you're thinking about, and we want to help you make your proposal as strong as possible. So get in touch with us. Also, first thing we're probably going to ask you is for a one-pager. And this is basically just an overview of your research that identifies the objectives, your broader impacts, and your intellectual merit. Doesn't have to be a nice, clean, polished, final perfect version of what you plan, but it's something for us to take a look at and discuss with you. One of the things that most program officers in the Arctic section do is spend a lot of time meeting with potential applicants. I probably spend 15 hours a week meeting with PIs or principal investigators. I meet with everybody from students who are planning dissertation proposals to established PIs who have, multiple multi-million-dollar NSF awards. And we answer questions, we talk through the different aspects of their research, we talk about intellectual merit and broader impacts. So this can be a really good way for you to just become more familiar with how NSF works and to start developing a relationship with a program officer. It might not be me, it might be another program officer, but we really do want to know who you are. So what that does is when you then submit a proposal, I know who you are. We've already talked. I have an idea of what kind of research you're working on. And that's only to your benefit. So the worst case scenario is you email me and I say, oh, I don't have time. I don't think that's ever happened in the 2.5 years I've been at NSF. I don't think I've ever said that. So reach out if you have any questions. It can even just be a 15-minute get to know you kind of meet and greet. Okay, when we talk about solicitations, we're talking about these kinds of things. We call them program solicitations, but they're also sometimes called requests for proposals or RFPs. Sorry, we don't call them that at NSF, but solicitations. This is the specific call for proposals on a specific topic to a specific program. This one is the doctoral dissertation research solicitation, what we call the DDRI or DDRIG. If you're a dissertation student out there and you haven't applied for one of these, you should do so, even just to get the experience. They're pretty prestigious when you can get them. I don't see enough of these. I'd like to see more of them. and they have deadlines twice a year. My program, which is listed here, third, I think it's second line down. So this is the general solicitation for all of the Arctic division, but we accept Arctic social science There are 2 deadlines per year for these. You still just barely have time to make the May 15th application deadline if you're interested. DDRIs are up to $40,000. So that's pretty nice for dissertation research, although sometimes in Alaska, it doesn't necessarily go that far. Dissertation research projects can be up to 1 to 3 years. And you cannot request salary on DDRIs. However, you can request funds to travel to your field site, to make conference presentations nationally or internationally. You can purchase equipment, you can purchase supplies, a new computer, and you can pay participants in a focus group or interviewees or host a community gathering or something like that. You must apply, though, through university-sponsored programs. This is one thing that students sometimes get a little confused. You cannot just apply directly to NSF by yourself. You must apply through your university-sponsored programs office. And so you need to start the process earlier than you think you do, because that going through sponsored programs is going to add at least a couple of weeks. So doctoral dissertation research awards, any field of anthropology, anything related to Alaska would potentially be relevant to this program. Postdoctoral research fellowships, these are relatively new. They're only 2 years old, and the target date just passed, but if you are a recent PhD or you are anticipating receiving your PhD within the next, say, 6 to 12 months, you should consider applying for a postdoc research fellowship. These allow for salary and research funds for 2 years, and they support a focused research project with a mentor who is a scientist or a researcher at a university in the United States. You identify a mentor with whom you want to basically learn a new skill or have access to his or her lab, or that person has a data set that you need to work with. And then you basically spend 2 years working on that project. It can be for folks who are already in polar field research, or maybe have never been in the polar research field before and are interested in starting a polar research project. We look for people who have not only good projects that have intellectual merit and broader impacts, but also for individuals who have leadership potential in the field. And what that means is really open to interpretation. Again, something we can talk about if you want to meet. Unlike other opportunities, the postdoctoral fellowships are restricted to U.S. citizens and permanent residents. They have stricter eligibility criteria than other NSF programs for some very specific reasons, but that does trip folks up sometimes. Okay. This is what we call the ARO. This is the broad standard research solicitation. And this is for all the Arctic sciences. So if you are faculty and you want to apply for a conference proposal, this is where you'd go to apply. If you're interested in a standard 5-year research project or 1-year research project, this is where you go. This solicitation is updated every 3, 4, 5 years, but this is where you're going to find the general guidelines for NSF Arctic research. Okay, what's the process? After you submit your proposal, you are headed for you're submitting on the basis of either a deadline, a target date, or no deadline. Now, this Arctic Research Opportunities has no deadlines. In other words, you can submit your proposal whenever you're ready. We want the best proposals possible, and that sometimes means that it's going to take you longer than whatever a deadline used to be. That's why we actually, one of the reasons we got rid of deadlines is because sometimes people were really scrambling at the last minute and submitting proposals that maybe weren't really up to snuff. So this particular solicitation has no deadlines. There are still programs at NSF that use deadlines, but the movement is toward no deadlines. Some opportunities have what we call target dates, and those are the dates by which we want to see your proposal for fullest consideration. Usually, if you're within a week of that target date, we'll still accept your proposal, and under extenuating circumstances, we'll extend that. But target dates are a little bit more, give us more wiggle room. But the standard research proposal in the Arctic section has no deadlines. Once your proposal comes in, it will either go out again for ad hoc review, so that's review by individual specialists, a minimum of 3 usually, who, just like manuscript reviews, or we'll hold a panel. And Arctic Social Sciences is not currently holding panels. And the reason is that proposals come in, I'll get maybe a couple a month, and there's never a large enough set of proposals to have a panel. However, the other programs do hold panels. We hold panels for the postdoc research fellowships. However, dissertation proposals generally go to ad hoc review. Part of that also for social sciences is that the diversity of proposals that come into the program, I mean, it can be everything from community health to research on Russian missions to EPA policy. I mean, it's just all over the map. And so it's really hard to pull together a single panel to consider all of those proposals that has the right expertise. After those reviews come back, and for ad hoc, we usually give a month. They usually come in after about 6 or 7 weeks. Then they're evaluated by the program officers, and a recommendation is made to either fund or decline the proposal. That process averages about 4 to 6 months. It can be a little shorter, can be a little longer, but you should figure a minimum of 4 months. Our objective is to get back 75% of decisions within 6 months. That's our NSF-wide objective. We're not too bad at doing that. Usually I can turn things around even faster than that in social sciences, but not always. It depends on the topic, depends on what the proposal is. Okay, writing a proposal is not like writing a paper. It's not like writing a dissertation. It's not a manuscript. Proposals need to appeal to the sponsor. So they need to appeal to what NSF is interested in funding. A good way to figure that out is to read the solicitation and meet with a program officer. Proposals are about work that should be done, not work that has been done, unless that work is directly relevant to what you're proposing. So they're about what you will do. They should be project-centered. You should have a nice, clearly defined, parameterized project with objectives and activities clearly defined. You want to convince us, reviewers and program officers, of how important the work is and that it can be done, that you are the right person to do it, and that you've got a research design, a plan that's going to get that work done. You want to be enthusiastic about it. This is not the place for sort of a boring recitation of data. We want you to be enthusiastic because that conveys enthusiasm to the program officers and to reviewers, ideally. And brevity and clarity are where you really want to be with this. Avoid jargon. Don't write me, five paragraph sentences that use a lot of jargon and have to be reread 4 times in order to understand what you're talking about. Be brief, be clear. Adhere to the constraints on pagination and length, and they're clearly defined in the massive NSF guidelines. But usually that's not a problem because your sponsor programs office will help you meet those requirements. As I said, accessible language, easily understood. only use fancy language if you really need to convey the idea. But this is not like the theory chapter in your dissertation, right? We want to know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And we want you to use clear language to explain that as much as possible. Okay, common mistakes. Too much theory. This is most commonly a problem with dissertation projects. Again, your dissertation, it's not the same thing. You're writing a proposal, not a dissertation. So we'd like to see a theoretical framework, but we don't want you to do a recitation of, you know, all the theorists who have worked on the particular topic that you're talking about. The next item is the number one most common error across the board in any type of proposal. Methods are not sufficiently detailed. It is hard to go overboard on the level of detail here. Whatever you've written up in your methods, go back and be more detailed. Especially if the method is untested or folks might be unfamiliar. You want to be really specific here, what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, who you're going to do it with, and how many or how much. Be really specific here. I would say that close to 100% of the proposals that my program declines have lack of detail in methods as one of the key reasons for decline. Let me just say that again. Now I'm thinking about it, 100%, close to 100% of my declines in my proposal, in proposals I receive for dissertations, postdoc fellowships, standard research proposals have insufficiently detailed methods as one of the key reasons for declines. It's not broader impacts, it's not intellectual merit, it's methods. Another common problem, project scope is too large or too narrow. You would be amazed at the number of proposals I get that don't identify a location in the Arctic. They're going to study the Arctic. Your project almost certainly has a location and a time frame. Identify that location and time frame for the readers, for the reviewers and the program officers. On the other hand, don't be too narrow because we're looking for science that's going to inform our understanding of the Arctic more broadly. It may be the Alaskan Arctic, but we don't want it to be too narrow, but we also don't want you to take on the entirety of the Arctic in a one-year project, okay? Again, scope can often be narrowed down or expanded based on discussion. So this is another good reason to get in touch. Research plan won't achieve the goals of the project. In other words, link your objectives to the actual activities. Now, I know this seems really obvious, but when you lay out your activities, think about what kind of data they're going to give you and whether that data is going to actually answer the question you say you're going to answer. Finally, no letters of collaboration. Again, as I mentioned before, if you are working in a community, we want to know that that community collaboration is intact, is already there, and we want a letter from the community that says, hey, we agree to collaborate. Similarly, if you're going to do museum collections work, we want to know that that museum has provisionally given you permission. If you're going to do archaeology, where you're going to actually go out and collect samples or artifacts, we want to know where those materials are going to go, where they're going to be curated, how that's going to be handled, and we want the museum to be on board with that. Those are just common examples of letters of collaboration that we look for. They can be from a number of different organizations or sometimes individuals, but if you need a letter of collaboration, think about that. Reviewers increasingly look for those and they ding you if they're not there. Do you need a letter of collaboration? Again, talk it through with an advisor, think it through. If you've got a standard research proposal, think whether or not the success of your project depends on someone outside your project helping you out, collaborating, providing a service, providing analysis. It just depends. Again, this is something that can easily be discussed or answered in a meeting or an email. Okay, best practices, we're hitting towards the end. Best practices, start with a compelling introduction. Here's the enthusiasm. Convey the significance of your project. The significance of your project is the project's intellectual merit. You want to lead with that right up front, why we care. Identify the where and when of your paper topic. What time period are we talking about? Where are we talking about? Don't just tell me Alaska, tell us where in Alaska, 3 communities in Southwest Alaska, or the community of Cake in Southeast, or tell us where and when. Use figures wisely and sparingly. A map can be very informative, but a general map of Alaska to an Arctic program is not going to be really very helpful. Think about your audience. Your audience is program officers like me who have worked in Alaska, have worked in the Arctic, and it's going to be reviewers who are probably familiar with the Arctic. So if you're going to put a map in, make sure the map does work. Okay, it actually is achieving the objectives. Timelines can be very helpful, especially if you have a complex set of activities. It's also especially recommended for dissertation projects and postdoc fellowships, where reviewers really want to know that you've thought through the activities you're proposing. So a timeline may be appropriate. It's part of the next item, lay out a clear work plan, which goes for everybody. Explain the roles for each participant. If you have an item in your budget where you're going to pay a statistician, explain in the narrative what that person is doing, because otherwise reviewers are going to ask, hey, they want money for a statistician, but it's not clear what they're going to do. That goes back to methods and analysis that you need to explain clearly. And come up with a realistic budget. I am asked all the time, what is the budget limit? And the answer is, there is no budget limit. We want you to ask for the amount of money that you need to do your project right and well. Don't cut corners. We are never going to decline a proposal because of the budget. We're never going to decline a proposal because of the budget, okay? Let's say you have what you consider to be a crazy budget, and it goes out. You get high marks on intellectual merit, you get high marks on broader impacts. We're going to come back to you and we're going to say, hey, we need to work on we can't afford this year, or we think your budget could be cut in these places, and we work it out. We're not going to decline simply because the budget is too big. In fact, in several cases, I've gone back and said, this is not enough for what you want to do. We can tell if you're cutting corners, and we can also tell when you're padding. So don't cut corners and don't pad. Tell us realistically what you need to do. Again, reviewers and program officers are familiar with work in the Arctic. So, don't underestimate what it's going to cost to, have a helicopter trip out to a remote location. On the other hand, don't try to put in extra money for things that you think you might need. There are ways to deal with that it can be very upfront and justified. Something I would ask everyone to think about is to include in your budget line items for publication costs for open access. We're happy to support that. So, put in an extra $3,000 or $5,000 for open access publication. So instead of an embargo, your manuscript, once it's public, your article is out there and available to everyone. Again, we can talk through the specifics of that if you have any questions. Okay, I'm going to speed it up here because I'm going longer than I thought I was going to go. Broader impacts, benefiting society. You can define your broader impacts. We don't have a preconceived notion of what they should be. They can be teaching, training, and learning, again, of any category of student or learner from K-12 all the way up through, learning projects for seniors. Broaden participation in science, broaden participation in education, broaden participation in data collection, you name it. Building or enhancing partnerships. Again, these are huge categories. Enhancing infrastructure or research capacity, and meeting community needs. No proposal is going to hit all of these, but hitting one of them really well can make for very good, strong, broader impacts. If you pick one of these and you write a very clear plan for achieving it and disseminating your research, that can really make or break a proposal. Don't try to hit all of them. In fact, unless you're, proposing $10 million project, in which case you're probably not coming to my program anyway. Pick one or two of these. Pick something that reflects your own strengths or the strengths of your department or the strengths of your research team. And then be just as specific here in terms of the activities and the methods you're going to use as you were in the research component. Okay. All proposals should have a plan for dissemination, and that should be both scholarly dissemination and community dissemination. So scholarly, conferences, journal articles, special issues. Whenever possible, identify which conference, which journal. We're not going to hold you to it if you decide, hey, I want to go to the American Anthropology Association meeting instead of the SAAs. That's fine. But give us an idea of the kinds of conferences. I shouldn't be seeing, for example, a dissertation proposal that doesn't have conference plans for the little AAAs. We want to see that you're going to submit to a journal or two or three, depending on, again, on the size of your project. Identify some candidate journals that you think would be appropriate venues for your work. Or maybe you have a special issue, you like to propose a special issue. Again, identify the journal that you think would be the best fit. Community dissemination. We also want to see that you have a plan for getting the findings of your work back to the community. Often that takes the form of public presentations. However, I've also seen posters for distribution to schools. I've seen ethnographic pamphlets that have photos of elders and quotations. I've seen small scale traveling exhibits for museums. I've seen school curricula. I mean, all kinds of things. Again, we don't want to tell you what kind of community project or community outcome or product. I'm looking for product. That's what I'm looking for here. We don't want to tell you what kind of community product you need. And it's fine if you work with a community to develop that, in which case, tell us how you're going to work with the community to figure out what the product should be. In other words, tailor the dissemination plan to what the community wants or needs, what its priorities are. Okay. What if you're declined? You will be. You will be. We've probably all been, but it's not the end of the world. You should treat this just as you would treat a manuscript submission to a journal. Turn around and resubmit it. Dissertation proposals are, I would say 80% are probably, and I just made that up out of, I don't know, it's not a scientific number, but my guess is 70 to 80% are declined the first time around. But many in my program are funded this when they're revised and resubmitted, because there's a really steep learning curve there. Take some time to consider the reviews more than once. They may be very upsetting. Give yourself some time to think about them, read them, go back and read them again. Identify commonalities in reviews, both the weaknesses and the strengths. Don't fixate on that really cranky comment who you're pretty sure you know who said that. We're not going to decline a proposal because one person made a cranky comment. So don't get too carried away with that. Ask someone that you trust to read over them and help you sort of process them. And because almost all reviews are going to have something of value that you can take away. It's a rare review that has nothing of use, even the most critical review. In fact, the most critical reviews are sometimes the most helpful if you can get yourself into a space where you can actually read it and benefit from the comments. But the last item is probably the most important, is come back and email me after you're declined, because I want to talk to you. I have never declined a project that doesn't have some intellectual merit. And most of the time, it's clear intellectual merit, but lack of detail and methods. I would say that is the most common. I've never had a project come across my desk that doesn't have some intellectual merit. And often reviewers will say, hey, we really like the idea here. There's just not enough detail. So come back, give yourself a couple weeks, email me, set up a time to meet, and then we can talk about the specifics of the comments and how to strategize, whether you should resubmit, whether you should consider a different program, whatever. Okay, last slide, email me. My contact information, and don't feel bad about pinging me if I don't immediately respond. I don't mind being pinged at all. So questions? I'm going to stop sharing. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, you guys are welcome to drop questions into the chat, or if you would like me to unmute your microphone, you can do the little emoticon to raise your hand.
I'm happy to see I've answered all the questions you could possibly come up with.
It seems like there's a question in the chat here, Erica, actually from Kate Krasinski, and it says, "Can you talk about how REUs might integrate into your program?"
Yes, research experiences for undergraduates, great broader impacts. Yes, so REUs are additional sources of funding. They come from outside my program, and they can be integrated with a program, with a project that my program funds. It can have an REU component added into it that is funded separately. And yes, I would be happy to talk about that. An REU component is basically a broader impact, you know, on steroids, right? I mean, because that's the education and learning component. So REUs are great. They're not for everybody, not all faculty are interested in this kind of thing, but yes, I would be happy to consider a project that has an REU component. With REUs, could a non-academic organization like the Eligibility Museum? I think so. I would have to look into that, but I think so. Email me and I can look into it specifically. That's a good question. We try to be as broad as possible, and it's actually a very timely question because we want to see more proposals coming from or in participation or collaboration with Indigenous organizations like the Eligibility Museum. I'm a graduate student, terminal MA. Is there any NSF funding relevant to MA theses? Not directly for MA thesis funding. However, you may have an advisor, faculty advisor who has a project that could fund part of your research. Of course, that would be dependent on that advisor having a successful proposal. But I'm afraid, no, there's no direct funding for MA theses per se.
Great. Okay. Any final questions before we thank Erica for her time? Oh, yeah.
Are salaries for culture barriers considered appropriate? We would not consider them salaries, and be careful with calling it a salary because sponsored programs offices get really upset about that. We would consider honoraria or stipends for culture bearers absolutely appropriate. And we would, in fact, we look for that. If you have participants or you have Indigenous people with Indigenous knowledge who are not reimbursed or not compensated appropriately, we would want to see that. So absolutely yes. And probably next question is how much? And the answer is it depends. We want I would recommend that you work with the tribal council or tribal organization and ask what is appropriate. NSF will pay whatever is considered to be appropriate. That might be $50 an hour. It might be $500 a day. It just depends. So absolutely, positively, we want to see funding in there for appropriate compensation for culture bearers, traditional knowledge holders. Absolutely. Salaries are acceptable for non-PI staff. PI, yes, correct. Yes. So salaries in NSF speak, and probably for most sponsored programs, salaries are for university employees. So that's faculty, that's student employees, and that may be administrative or clerical folks who are already on staff, or in some cases, you might propose to hire through the university hiring system. Those salaries are absolutely appropriate. I would add in here that the NSF rule is for PIs, for academic salaries. We're happy to pay up to 2 months of salary per year, no questions asked. Anytime you go over that 2-month rule, we're going to look for additional justification because we have to make additional justification. But up to 2 months of salary for faculty or for any of the PIs is fine. Obviously, students can be employed, 12 months out of the year, or they might be 9 months. Clerical and administrative can be 12 months out of the year, depending on the size of your project. And I'm happy to answer specific questions about that. So yeah, the answer is yes, salaries are acceptable for non-PI staff.
It looks like there was another question a little further up about whether you need to be a US citizen to apply.
Great question. Okay, so the vast majority of NSF programs accept proposals from individuals at US institutions of higher education and or museums and tribal organizations. So you must have an affiliation with some institution. Under certain very narrow circumstances, we'll accept proposals from, say, sole proprietors of cultural resource firms. So that might be appropriate, but you need to be associated with an institution of higher education, such as a university or a museum or a tribal organization. And if you have specific questions about how to do that or whether you're eligible, let me know. Just drop me an email. There was another question in there. So you do not need to be a US resident, citizen, or national to apply for the vast majority of NSF programs. You must be affiliated with a US institution. That's the key. The exception is the postdoc fellowships, and this is because of federal statutes. Postdoc fellowships are restricted to US nationals. Residents or permanent residents or citizens. Let's see, hold on, I think I had another one come in. Does NSF ever encourage natural or geophysical science proposals, either funded or rejected, to follow how they're doing? Yes, 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 yes. They absolutely should. So this is a question about whether natural or geophysical science proposals basically need to follow the Section 106 process. NSF is responsible for following the Section 106 process if there is any ground disturbance involved. There have been cases where these have slipped through the cracks. The Arctic section itself is pretty good about keeping track of these. However, some other programs at NSF are not as good about that. Our intent is to follow federal law, and Section 106 is necessary if there's any cases of drilling or excavation. You're absolutely right. If Section 106 is not being followed, then it's probably something that fell through the cracks. Any other questions? Come on, you got a captive program officer here. I'm here to answer your questions. Don't be scared. I'm not too scary. I'd love to see more dissertation proposals. Don't be scared. Worst it can be is declined, and I'll be nice. I'll decline you nicely if I have to decline you. Do you see common pitfalls of larger or longer projects? Yes, one of them, they are harder to schedule and budget for. There are ways of doing that, though. There are ways of doing that, and that is on a year-by-year funding basis, and we can work that out. One of the common pitfalls is you have a lot of people, you have a lot of activities, but they're not clearly integrated. That is a really common problem that I see, especially when someone wants to do social science and, say some kind of natural science like monitoring, soil temperature or permafrost or temperature or something, and they don't have it integrated. That's one common problem. Another common problem is having a lot of people on a project, paying a lot of people, but it's not clear what those people are doing. So that should be treated in the budget justification. I also see projects that are just too ambitious, especially when a PI has not got a track record yet. It's one thing if you have a track record of many years of large proposals and you propose a $1 million project. It's different if you're a new early career PI and you're proposing a huge project with 5 different PIs that's $2 million. That can be hard to justify because you don't have a track record. And again, I'm just, this is just in my experience. The best, if you're proposing a big project, you should start talking to a program officer sooner rather than later. I often meet with people proposing big projects 2, 3, or even 4 times before the proposal comes in to talk through it at different stages. So I would encourage you to either reach out to me or reach out to me and I can tell you who to talk to. Let's see. Is the subarctic considered the Arctic? Yes. No, we do not downgrade the subarctic. Absolutely not. This is a good question. For the purposes of my program, all of Alaska is more or less the Arctic. Don't quote me on that, but for practical purposes, if it's in Alaska, it's considered in my program. If you're talking about the subarctic in the Pleistocene, there's really no problem with that. Generally, if it's like Southeast Alaska, I'm going to want to see some sort of justification of how this tells us about Alaska more generally. But no, we do not, my program does not take a strict definition of the Arctic as within the Arctic Circle or north of tree line. No. So, Kananaw Valley is fine. Aleutians too. Yes, Aleutians too. Yes, I've even funded something in Juneau. Advice for, let's see, for a non-academic organization or nonprofit. Okay, so one caveat here is for non-academic, higher institutions of higher education is that there can sometimes, you have to be in NSF systems administratively, and so that can actually add time. So you should plan on that. If the institution has never received an NSF award or hasn't recently had an NSF award, it will have to go through basically administrative financial review. Specific advice, capitalize, if it's a non-academic organization, capitalize on that constituency in your broader impacts. Like a museum, that's actually can really be a benefit to a project. If you're cooperating with a museum or the museum is leading the project, we want to see proposals from museums, from small museums, from tribal organizations that can actually work in your favor. And, to be more specific, I'd need to know what the situation was. But again, contact me, we can talk it through. If a small private school is collaborating with a larger R1, is it better or easier to run funding through one institution or to split funds between the two? There are a couple of different ways to do that. And it depends on the situation. So one way is to give it all to the R1 and then the R1 actually pays for everything. Another way is a subaward. And so the funding goes to the R1 and then the R1 issues a subaward to the smaller institution. That can be very efficient. A third way is a collaborative where the same institution, where each institution submits its own proposal. The specific way I would recommend would depend on what the institution is and what you're trying to accomplish with that collaboration. So what do you need to fund? That's one of those, talk with your program officer. Okay. I was thinking the other way around though. Oh, so funding through the small institution and then that's not a problem. Yeah, we actually would be happy to provide more funding to a small institution. In fact, when I'm making a justification for funding, if it's a non-R1, I always include that, because way too much funding goes to R1s from NSF's perspective. It's not just my perspective. And as folks on this call know, UAF receives the bulk of funding. They're not an R1, but they do receive the bulk of funding in Alaska higher education from NSF. And so we'd want to see more funding going to smaller institutions. Brian, give me a call or drop me an email and we can talk it through. Other questions?
Hi, Erica. I actually raised my hand earlier. This is Corey. Thank you so much for the presentation. I was a little bit late, but everything you said has been very helpful. Yeah, and just to reemphasize, I have half comment, half question, and I didn't want to write a story in the comment box. So basically, and they both have to do with kind of, these big calls for more interdisciplinary science projects, and then, to me, pretty obvious need that of more engagement between natural sciences and social sciences. And so the first comment I had, the comment part of it is that, when I went to, for instance, when I go to the American Geophysical Union, for instance, this becomes extremely clear when you see 30,000 natural scientists working there. And then, I've been going there for a good 6-7 years. And every time I go there, I'm just like, man, I got to introduce these guys to my anthropology friends. Maybe it could help a lot, sort of thing. So which leads to the question, is there any initiative at NSF to try to directly break down some of those barriers? Because it's become really clear to me in my experience that the barriers between natural sciences and social sciences still exist very clearly. And, this is, and just to encourage everyone in the room or whoever watching this recording to really look at some of the NSF funding, because there's so much opportunity there. And I know, as a Native institution, part of Native institutions, I know that anthropologists and social scientists are kind of reached at the 11th hour sort of thing. So is there an overall initiative to try to make connections there at earlier phases of the project writing?
That's a really, really excellent point. And you just identified a problem that NSF is trying to deal with, which is that there isn't sufficient integration of the natural sciences and the social sciences often in projects that really absolutely positively need it. NNA, the Navigating the New Arctic Initiative, which is now in its 5th year, I think, was developed in part to address this. And, as many of you probably know, it ran into some problems because of the lack of understanding of the importance of community engagement in all of the sciences supported by NSF. I think that in my 20 years in anthropology, I have seen a slow shift, but I think we're getting better at it. I think the natural scientists are starting to realize more and more that if they want to work in a community, they need to take that community into account in a meaningful and authentic way. I see a lot of natural scientists feeling like they need to do something, but they're not really clear on how to do it. We are increasing capacity with that. And one of the ways that we're doing that is, let me talk a little bit about the postdoc fellowship. And the postdoc fellowship is for those people who have just gotten a PhD and they're starting Arctic work. Our last cohort from last year has had basically a year of workshops on community engagement. And the whole point of that is to encourage them to become more educated about how to do their science responsibly in communities, how to communicate across the science, non-scientist barrier, and how to work collaboratively. And I think capacity among scientists is increasing, but it's a slow process. So I see hope, but Corey, you're absolutely right. That is a continuing, ongoing struggle. Thank you so much for your comment. Other comments and questions? All right, I hope this means I'm going to see, like, you're all working on proposals right now. You're jotting down notes, right? I'm going to see all kinds of new proposals. I would love to see more proposals. I hope that if nothing else, this presentation has conveyed to you the general interest of the Arctic section in seeing more proposals from folks at all levels. Please, I'm the social scientist. I will expect some emails out there. But I can connect you with the natural scientists in the Arctic section. We all work really, really closely together. So don't be hesitant to reach out if you have questions. There's a lot of information on the NSF website, but it can also be pretty intimidating. So hopefully this presentation has done a lot to lower that level of intimidation. We want to hear from you.
Okay, let's give Erica a virtual round of applause. If you guys are interested in this workshop, you can always find these recorded videos on the association website as soon as the conference ends. So if you need to review any of this information or you're looking for Erica's contact information, this video will be available to you through the association website. Okay, thanks so much, Erica.
Thank you. Thanks so much for hosting the forum. It's been really useful, I think. I hope.